shouldn't have been so hard. We're rolling.
Okay. Good evening. This open meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's it's already starting. Executive Order of March 12, 2020, and the provisions extended by the Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 signed by Governor Baker on June 16, 2021, due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. These provisions suspended the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I hereby call to order this meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee, February 2nd at 7 p.m. I am Linda Lukowski, Chair of the School Committee, and I would like to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Maureen?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Erin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Paul Goldner?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Paul Mayette?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Caitlin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Narissa?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Susanna?
I'm here and I can hear you.
That's everybody, right? Paul didn't come on, okay. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Kyle?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Shannon?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Anna?
Here and I can hear you.
Brian?
Here and I can hear you.
For this meeting, the Triton School Committee is convening remotely via Zoom using the information posted on the district's website identifying how the public may join. If you are personally attending by video conference using your device's camera, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Committee members and administrators, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. All supporting materials that have been provided to the members of this body are available on the district's website with the agenda posting unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Do we have anybody from the public?
We do not.
Okay. I will read the vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students through the adoption of best practices and other active partnerships with families in the wider community who are united in supporting development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners. Students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Okay. The next item is the chairperson's remarks. We've had many days of speaking about the budget, and tonight we'll continue that. I'm going to pass this on to you, Brian.
Okay. All right, so you should have seen, excuse me, in not Dropbox, what do you call it, Board Docs. There were 4 documents that were attached yesterday. There is 2 position descriptions. These are not detailed job descriptions, but some information for a STEM educator, which we had talked about previously. And we do have a member of the public coming in now, Bernie Collins back. And an elementary SEL educator, that's brand new. We haven't talked about that yet. And then a document called Proposed FY23 New Spending, and then Potential Assessment. So if you want to start with the proposed FY23 new spending, so I can explain to you what's changed, and then we'll go through the elementary STEM educator proposal in the SEL. So in essence, what we did is we heard there were a lot of priorities, and we also know that this is the high water mark. So what we've done tonight is paired out 2 of the positions we had originally proposed, as well as the capital technology. So for the projectors. So starting at the top, for the 3 elementary schools, each elementary had proposed a social worker. Pine Grove and Newbury spoke, and the discussion was very much a clinical need, an intervention need. Salisbury has a full-time social worker, Ellen Lincoln, and so this is a position that's missing at Pine Grove and Newbury. The proposal for Catherine to add a social worker was more instructional based. There was a discussion whether it needed to be half-time or full-time, ended up putting it in full-time. But her angle, because she has a full-time social worker that is doing the clinical work, was to be an instructor. So what we did here in this proposal, and just the new nuances, the way it translates, is that where we had 3 proposed social workers, we're now replacing that with 2. One of them will be split half-time at Newbury, half-time at Pine Grove, as a half-time clinical social worker, providing direct therapeutic interventions for students. So that's one of the FTEs. The other FTE is turning into what we're currently calling, and it's a work in progress, I would say, an SEL educator. And so this was kind of the spirit behind what Catherine had actually spoken about as directly implementing and delivering an SEL curriculum. So where we talked about it being a half-time, full-time, at this point, what we're talking about is one position that's shared, similar to the STEM educator that was proposed originally between the 3 elementary schools. We still have to figure out schedule. We have to figure out where this person is going to find the time. So we envision this kind of shoulder to shoulder with teachers, rotating. But that's the kind of the angle, if you will, that or the vision that Catherine had seen for the position. So by putting one in, it provides that for all 3 schools, because that's a need for all 3 schools. The one other full-time social worker we're adding for that original 3 FTEs down to 2. The other one is a genuine, legitimate therapeutic social worker, half-time split between Newbury and Pine Grove. So that's it. That's across on the first page there with Newbury, Pine Grove, and Salisbury. Anything that's been adjusted is blue. So you can see the social worker full-time at Newbury was adjusted from full-time to half-time. That's the traditional social worker. Then there's that SEL educator that's actually was not proposed at Newbury originally, is an increase of a 0.3 for the 28,803. The only other adjustment there is the STEM teacher. We talked about the fact that it was 0.3 rather than 0.33. So it's a full third. So that's the adjustment from 26,590 to 28,803. So the exact same thing happens at Pine Grove School. Rather than a full-time clinical social worker, it's a half-time. The addition of that SAL shared position, the adjustment of the salary for the STEM teacher. And then at Salisbury, you can see it's actually taking out the social worker request. I could have struck that and made that a 0.3, but I was trying to show exactly what we're doing. So that's actually not a full-time position, and instead it's the 0.3 SEL educator, keeping for Salisbury, keeping the full-time special education teacher, and for Pine Grove and Newbury, keeping the additional half-time reading interventionist. So aside from questions about the position, does that make sense as far as this sheet and where the numbers lie? Yeah. Okay, so if we keep going, I'm seeing nods. So if we keep going, on the second page, there's no change. Again, we've taken, in essence, all the priorities on, that's not true. I'm sorry, for the high school, you can see that we had originally proposed a technology integration specialist. We talked about that, that is something that is a need. And Patrick agrees wholeheartedly that at this point in time, given what Greg has brought to the table, that we don't need that position right now. So that could be a future need, but right now we're able to meet the needs with the addition of Greg and the role that he's played. So that is not included in this latest version. So far we've removed one of the social worker FTEs and then the technology integration specialist FTE. And then if you continue on down, it's the third page. The only shift here is that it's neutral as far as the bottom line. You can see that there's a school choice. Well, that's an interesting word that I threw in there. Reducation. So that should say reduction. So we actually have, we have more money than we need in our choice out charges. We're going to have less. We have 20 students who are going to graduate and decrease it even further than we decrease. This year it's at about 700,000. We had 630 in the budget. We need more like 550, 560. However, we also have the choice charges for this year are going to be higher than we anticipate. So we have to assume those will be the same as next year. So we actually, again, you remember, we receive school choice funds for students who come in through a revolving account, and we can charge things off to that. We're charged for school choice students who leave the district out of the general fund. It is one of the biggest and weirdest things as far as all the budgeting, because it just doesn't make sense. It should just be netted. I get it from an accounting standpoint, and I'm sure in Kyle's brain as an auditor, that makes perfect sense, but it still in my mind does not make sense at all. So what this is basically taking, you can see, so the school choice for the charges, we're going to take 69,671. That's actually 2 salaries. We're going to take that out of the general fund budget under choice charges, but then we need to take 2 people that were in the revolving account, and we're going to move them into the general fund budget. So that 69,671, when you see the budget document next week, will be a reduction in the school choice charges line, but you're going to see a commensurate increase in salary lines because those people are no longer charged to the revolving account. They're charged to the general fund. Did I do a good job, Kyle? Yes. Okay. So continuing, just so we can orient to the entire document. And then on the last page, page 4, you can see there's a classroom projector that we had for 22,740. We believe there'll be capacity, whether it's through ESSER funds or capacity within the current year budget, the discussions we've been having with the finance subcommittee, that there would be capacity to do that as a one-time project. Again, this is not putting the latest and greatest technology into the high school. This is putting, right, to some degree, outdated technology. They're old-fashioned projectors, but newer, brand new projectors. And this gets us to the next decision point with the building project. If you look at Pine Grove School and the technology with the interactive, with the regular dry, whiteboards with the interactive projectors, that's the new, latest. Actually, that's not the newest anymore. But any project we would do at the high school, middle school would certainly have newer technology. This is a stopgap. So that 22,740 is not included. So with the original proposal at the 1.742, this shows at $1.576 million increase. So if we want to go back and look at the 2 positions, so does that make sense as far as soup to nuts where the changes are from where we were discussing Saturday to where we are right now? I'm still seeing nods. Okay, so as far as the 2 positions, the STEM educator, we talked about that, at greater length, tried to put some thoughts on paper of how we see that position being used. Several of you spoke to that being a priority. As much as we have it on paper here, I do think it will continue to evolve. It is a field. It is certainly a priority that we need to focus on. And so we see this position, I'm not going to read it, but obviously providing some direct supports, maker spaces, STEM labs, but also a resource to help anyone who's teaching science, teach science better, specifically with science, technology, and engineer. The other position is brand new. That isn't anything we have talked about previously. We've had a lot of discussion about our wellness curricula and how we teach wellness, and in particular, social emotional wellness. There are specific curriculums out there, and the discussion around the table was, this is a deliberate we have a lot of reactive, right? We have a lot of things and services and interventions that we're doing on a reactive basis. This is an opportunity to be proactive and to actually deliver a consistent across all 3 elementary schools, a consistent SEL curriculum that we could say is being delivered to all students at the elementary level. Again, don't have the exact schedule worked out, but I think our thought was similar to where we talked about with the STEM teacher, that it would be a week at a time, so it could kind of focus and do work together as a school, similar to the STEM teacher and makerspaces. Similarly, could it be a 1 lesson every 3 weeks in the classrooms? Sometimes working shoulder to shoulder with classroom teachers, sometimes it would be individual, with that individual working with the student. So I don't know, Anna, is there more I should add? There are the things that we talked about with principals?
I don't think so in terms of how it might work. I would just say that with this position, we certainly have to begin I wouldn't even call it a curriculum review, because we know we don't have curriculum in that area, but a resource adoption, in which we would, similar to what we do in any discipline, is pull together a representative group, start exploring what's out there, and in terms of research-based curricula, and sort of do a comprehensive review, but in a little bit of an accelerated fashion, to make sure that we got the best curriculum in place for the beginning of the school year.
And just a note, so on both of these documents, it talks about assistant superintendent. You obviously know we're talking about retitling directors, finance operations, student services, curriculum instruction assessment. I didn't include that here, right? Because if this document is public right now, that's the position we have. Anna's position is assistant superintendent. So I didn't want to confuse, because these documents were being proposed for a current discussion, but obviously in an actual job description, it would be slightly different. So as far as the title. So I'm assuming there are questions about that. Either, both. Marissa.
Can wait for somebody else. I mean, I was hoping.
People like having you kick it off. Do you want Maureen to go first?
Yes, Maureen can go first. Thank you.
Maureen and Bob.
Take the pressure off you, Marissa. No, I just have a quick question, Brian, about the social worker. It's not about these two job descriptions. So how many, do you know approximately how many students would be serviced by a social worker at Newberry and at Pine Grove? Is there like a...
I don't know that number. It would be, I mean, I will say this. So Alicia Kenyon, for example, is the adjustment counselor at Newberry. We are working with far more students than we ever have, right? So there's kind of there's the population where we kind of have always and routinely worked with those students. The breadth of students and the profile, if you will, of students being worked that these folks are working with has expanded greatly. So this wouldn't necessarily be a caseload, right? Where you identify Brian needs services and is going to have services for 6 months. This role is a balance of triage and proactivity, right? So it's about building relationships and with the families and supports and making those connections. But I don't have an exact number, but it would be many.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is stuff we're contracting out for. So we have other folks coming in from the outside and they've kind of become one of ours, but they're on a contract basis. So this would be bringing a half-time position in, and it would be a full-time person. Always easier to find a full-time person that would be shared between the two schools. And we always try to make sure we're not sharing staff on the half day, right? So you're in one building and one in the morning and somewhere else in the afternoon. You just lose too much time. So generally I would assume this would be every other day type arrangement.
Yeah, I guess I was getting at the caseload because I have concerns about splitting a person like this. It could be quite an overwhelming job, to handle the large number of students between two different schools.
Yeah.
So, okay, thanks.
Yeah, and it is, right? I mean, so if this were a perfect world, we would be putting an SEL educator, a STEM educator, and a full-time social worker at every building, and potentially even give Salisbury an extra one. But I think, you know, at this point, it was both in talking with Beth and Nicole. I will say this too. We talked about class sizes on Saturday. So when I spoke with, that was Salisbury and Newbury. So when I spoke with Beth and Catherine, both of them without hesitation said they would take nothing else new to protect class sizes. They would give up the halftime reading interventions, they would give up the SEL teacher, they would give up the social worker to make sure class sizes stay where they are. And then, you know, it is the nature of the classes, right? I don't want to say too much information, but those groups, it is very much needed. So, but back to, I think where I started that point was they believe a halftime is a great place to start. I think a full-time could be utilized, but they believe a halftime would be absolutely useful and beneficial. And if we needed to, right, we still have the opportunity through ESSER funds, we can add contract services where it's needed. But having the halftime, they thought was a great benefit. So other hands go up. So we're just down to you, Marissa.
Caitlin had her hand up.
I think Maureen asked her question.
I was actually, I guess my concern was similar to Maureen, so I was just gonna let it lie, but I was looking, I had a quick chance after 6 p.m. to look at the district report card, and I was looking at Salisbury's and Newbury's and PJS, so I only did a quick scan, but when I was looking over Catherine's proposal and this, I guess my concern was, is a 1/3 SEL educator enough between the 3 schools? Does Salisbury need at least some help in the social worker setting? Because right now, how many do they have? 1?
So they have 1, and the Newbury and Pine Grove would have a half.
I was trying to doing like a quick look, and I can't see it getting any better going into next year.
Yeah,
So I was just wondering about caseloads and.
Yeah, I think when we talk about caseloads, that's comparing the 1 full-time at Salisbury to the halftime at Newbury in Pine Grove with the addition. If we're talking caseloads, I think this SEL educator would be impacting all students, right? So this is a push into the classroom where we're proactively delivering curricula in a way that we're ensuring all students have access to that. And certainly, right, I mean, as we noted here, NES, I use the example, NES Cares. Everyone knows about NES Cares. They're, I don't want to call it a program, right? But that's a well-adopted, I want to use the word program. And so it would work within that, whereas it would be unique to Pine Grove and unique to Salisbury, but it's giving that common language. So I don't think it's a caseload issue.
Well, that's what I was wondering when I was reading. I was rereading Catherine's proposal. That's when I put my hand down to see specifically what she was looking for. Was she looking for somebody that could do 2 roles, take off as a social worker and kind of help that 1 full-time person's caseload, but then also transition into that SEL thing? So that's what I was kind of trying to work through in my head. Thank you.
Certainly. And now we're down to you, Marissa.
Now I gotta go, huh? So first of all, my first reaction when I saw that there was a new position on here, I was like, whoa, this is late in the game. And then I thought to myself, you know, good on the principals for thinking this through and really thinking about the different tiers that you know, are kind of need to be addressed right now, and how best that they can do that, and making good use of money. So kudos to them for doing that, even though, you know, I'm sure it was a little like, can we change something now, farther along in the process. So that was my first thought. My question is, I guess, for the SEL educator, the first thing it talks about is the curriculum and these 5, I forget what the term was for it.
Core competencies.
core competencies of social emotional learning, yes, and teaching classroom lessons. So I was wondering, I know it's kind of early and this is being thought through. Is this something that's scheduled so that this educator would be in classrooms on a regular rotating basis? Or are we talking about a situation where a classroom teacher is seeing a need and is bringing, no. So this is literally like they're in this classroom for a half an hour on Tuesday mornings, once every 3 weeks.
Yeah, and so the way we talked about this is, right, so we ask a lot. I'm not gonna pick on elementary. I'm gonna focus on elementary teachers right now. We ask a lot of elementary teachers to have a craft, right? Their craft be comprehensive in what they teach. And what we always say is, right, we need to work on SEL, these competencies. And Anna and I were talking today, right, there's in the math curricula, all the curricula, they talk about these other SEL competencies. And even when you're having the conversation with teachers, you're like, you almost want to chuckle to say, we're going to fit this in two, right? Knowing there's just not enough time in the day. So we see this, again, 30,000 foot, and as delivering a set curricula to all students. So all students get to participate in this. And again, easily, I think just kind of summary right now, we're seeing it as rotated once every 3 weeks. So spend a week at a school and rotate through all the classrooms. Ideally, if this educator is delivering the content, and if they're doing it shoulder to shoulder with the teacher, I think part of this is when you say, hey, here's one more thing, it's not different. We just need to like kind of add these competencies. It's hard for a teacher not to think, but I have to teach math and I have to teach science and all these things, versus being able to see it firsthand. And then those things, those practices and the pedagogy just kind of filters into the rest of the day. So again, it could be full-time, right? Absolutely, we could use a full-time at every school, but the thought of having this kind of a proof of concept to say, does this work where we'll be able to live some very explicit content consistent across the 3 schools, so that, you know, when the kindergartners next year get to the middle school 7 years later, they've all had a similar experience, even if NES calls it NES Cares and Pine Grove calls it something different. So it is direct and explicit. Again, haven't figured out the exact schedule, but it is delivered to all students. It's not I have a need, someone is, and I will say, you know, to your point about kind of changing at the 11th hour, on paper and in all of our conversations, we want a social worker to teach this, right? So we're kind of, it's not really a change, but the likelihood of a social worker being a teacher is probably slim. So it really is an SEL educator, but ideally, when we think of all of our social workers that we have on staff already, yeah, those are the people we want actually delivering this curriculum for sure. So.
Okay, that makes more sense. And I think you kind of answered this, but it sounded like this is a co-teaching almost type of situation where this person would be coming in addition to the classroom teacher and working alongside the classroom teacher for the time that they're in the classroom. Is that accurate?
So we kind of, there's a lot of details to figure out, but that's the way we envisioned it, is that yes, it's shoulder to shoulder.
Okay.
And would there be times where the classroom teacher goes and the SAL teacher comes in? That could happen. But ideally, kind of over the time as this person becomes more embedded, if not right away, over time, absolutely. It's 2 hands, that class rather than 1, yes.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you. And my other question is just on the STEM teacher, which we've been kind of kicking around here. So the way it's written now, which I understand can change, makes it sound more like it's plugged into the science curriculum, the STE curriculum, and less like it's sort of those ad hoc moments with smaller groups of kids who just either they're free because of recess or they're free because it's win time and they're not getting another intervention or whatever. Is that accurate? Is this kind of moving, or is that, or we don't know and that's just kind of the way it was written?
So the last thing you said, is it moving? Meaning is it
shifting?
Is it shifting? Gotcha.
Yeah, because it was kind of like when we talked about it that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when we talked about it Saturday, it was kind of like, well, it would be nice to add on some technology to STE. So if the teachers are not doing technology and engineering a whole lot in the classroom, you know, this person could add on to that. But then it was also, it could be recess, it could be win time, it can be all of these things. The new description you just gave us makes it sound more like it's focused into those science blocks. But I don't know if that's an accurate.
I mean, I don't want to, I'll lay in a chat, but I mean, it's where it says providing students with appropriate learning experiences in the makerspace, designing, facilitating enrichment and extension activities. The reality is the amount of downtime is not the whole day.
Yeah.
So when they're not doing those pieces that are more extension, it's the coordinating with classroom teachers. So
Okay.
You want to say more, Anna? I'm always talking.
I think it really is a combination of both, even if it didn't read that way through here. And I also think there's potential for, based on like the needs and sort of the structures that are set up at each school already, that it has potential to look a little bit different. Like Newbury has the established makerspace and the schedule, and the students are kind of used to knowing that they can go during this win time. And I think that would be really easy to implement right away with this, where it's almost like we'd be building more of a makerspace program at each of the other schools.
Okay. And kind of as a follow-up to that, so I guess two questions. If we're talking about using win time, does that mean that students that are receiving interventions would not be able to access this opportunity?
No, I hope not, because I think that this needs, and that's part of the reason for, I think that all students need to have kind of explicit instruction in engineering and the experiences and engaging in that engineering design cycle. And that's sort of across the board for everybody. I think there are certainly students who, either because of interest or schedule or whatever, are sort of more primed to engage in this, and we want to give them that opportunity as well.
Okay. And my last question here is, I went through the 2016 SCE state standards. I went through what's in Atlas for the curriculum maps, and it doesn't look like there's a lot of engineering in what we're doing right now. I know in the description, it mentioned that it seems like maybe there's more in STEM scopes that doesn't directly align with the standards, but can you just talk about that? I guess I'm wondering where this plugs into that classroom piece, because obviously science is taking them a full year right now, that what they have right now. So I'm trying to figure out, I guess, how, what would be done and how it fits in.
So in terms of the science class, you're right. The STEM scopes that we use is aligned with the Massachusetts state standards, and it does align. So there's some lesson that aligns with every standard. The depth that it goes into in each standard certainly varies. And then the potential depth also varies. So, and I think I mentioned this briefly on Saturday, that teachers have a lot of choice in kind of within this explore component of each scope, that they can choose to use one part of it, they can choose to use two parts of it. And I think that what this will do is allow us to really engage in those engineering components of each scope that we may be moving over in order to make sure that we get to the exposure to the entire curriculum and sort of touching on every standard rather than diving deep into every standard.
Okay, so you're pretty confident that this person can plug in and sort of provide depth without taking away from the breadth of what's being covered in those classes?
I think so. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
On my at?
When you talk about the SEL teacher coming into the classroom, you talked about time, and it sounds like it would do a nice job of not requiring teachers to have that extra lesson to prep as far as that goes. Is there any talk or is there any concern about finding the time within the day? I know that, like you said, in the elementaries, we have to squeeze so much in. I know social studies gets shunted aside at times. Is there any concern or thought about that at this point?
Yes, there is concern. Yes, there are thoughts. It's not entirely teased out, but back to, I forget who made it, that's the question. if we had that totally figured out, we'd be recommending a full-time at every school, right? So part of this is fitting it in, whereas on a 3-week rotating basis, it's a half-hour, 40-minute lesson once every 3 weeks. All right, we can figure that out, okay? So has it been fully figured out? No. Am I confident we'll figure it out? Absolutely. Good question, though. Other, Mr. Gould.
Yes, first thing I'd say is I love the idea of that co-teaching, co-teaching SEL in the classroom at the elementary schools. I think that's a great solution to the problem, and hopefully over time reduces the need for the social worker, so that we're not looking for the full-time perhaps. I guess my question is we've got about 20-ish elementary classrooms at each school. So that's looking at about, maybe 4 or 5 different classrooms per day for that social worker during the course of the week. I guess what I'm wondering with that's a lot of movement over the course of 3 weeks. I'm not quite sure what the question is. I'm thinking about this as a person who's going to be doing a lot of movement and seeing a lot of people for a relatively short time frame. How is that going to play out? And I know there's no way to answer that, but
Well, no, I'll take a shot. So you think of the specialists, right? Art, music, PE, they do the same thing, and the standards are quite different from a kindergartner to a 6th grader at Pine Grove School. I think this will be similar. So they'd be in essence doing what a specialist does in any given week, where they're going to see every classroom K through 6. I think the benefit here is that if there's a specific, if we're talking about self-management or we're talking about self-awareness, there's going to be a lesson that's applicable at the kindergarten level on up through the 6th grade level. So I would assume, again, I'm not an expert here, but we'd be taking themes and competencies and adapting what you would talk about with self-awareness as a 6th grader is a lot more in-depth discussion than you would be at a kindergartner. So it's a lot, absolutely. Just like, not only do you have it like a music teacher that sees all classes in a week, they're then the following week going to see all classes at Pine Grove, and then they're going to see all classes at Newbury, and then they're going to see all classes at Salisbury. So it's definitely a lot for sure. So that's something we would have to be aware of, but it's not ideal. I mean, sharing positions between buildings is never the ideal, never. And in a world with infinite money, we would not.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
When I saw the SEL, I was a little taken back by it myself. But then when I looked at how it was being divided, I, like Narissa, thought that was an interesting way for the principals to come and say that this is what they wanted to do, instead of having 2 full-time social workers to come down with making this work. So I applaud them for that. The STEM teacher, I just have a question on that. The way that's going to be used, is that going to be like the SEL teacher where there'll be some co-teaching within the science program with this STEM teacher? That was my first question.
I think there's potential for that, to be co-teaching with a science teacher. And I've also talked with Beth, and she sees potential for co-teaching with library media specialists as well in some areas, making use of both the makerspace and the computer lab. So I do think there's great potential for that person working with other educators.
Because you talk about this STEM teacher possibly working with educators for STEM scopes and all that. What if a teacher decides that they don't want to use the STEM teacher to work with them on that? Is there going to be an accountability that each teacher at least have this teacher come in and work with them on some STEM scopes. Because I know at the elementary level, the teachers are so, ingrained in what they do in their day. They have their schedule and this is the way they want to do it. So I just want to make sure that the teachers are going to be open if this is voted on to have this be put in place, that the teachers are going to be using this.
Yes. Right. I mean, if we're investing in both providing these extension enrichment opportunities as well as someone who can refine and supplement, and I think like refine is a better word, right? The work that's happening in the classrooms, then absolutely, right? So if you're teaching science, we're making some shifts there. So yeah, it would not be optional.
Right. Well, I just want to make sure that
Good question.
we're utilizing that. I mean, you're talking to an engineer here, so I want this more than ever for our students to have this as part of their breadth of experience, But I want to make sure that if we're putting this in, that we're utilizing this to the fullest extent that we could utilize it with. I just think I just have another question. At Pine Grove, you have Mr. Campbell,
Mhm.
and then you would have a social worker, correct?
Yeah.
And then you would have the SEL educator there. At Newberry, you would have the social worker, the SEL. Do they have an adjustment counselor there?
And then at
Okay,
Salisbury, there's a full-time adjustment counselor and a full-time social worker.
okay. Now I just want to get to the reading interventionalists. I see that they're being offered for Newberry and Rowley. I know that Salisbury has Title I. And then at Newberry and Rowley, you have reading specialists, correct?
So we have them everywhere.
Okay,
We're adding additional supports as we were talking about the new positions. For Catherine, the priority was that special educator, is that more students being identified in receiving those services through an IEP. And the need was at Newbury and Pine Grove was for students who were not particularly on an IEP, but needing additional supports.
okay. Just because there was question about equitable and making sure it's across all elementary schools, I just wanted to make sure that the committee understood what was at each school. So that we're making sure of equitable across all three schools, which I know you guys would, but it's good for everybody because at each school, they're called different things.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I just want to make sure everybody understands what each school is having as for support. And I think that's all the questions that I had on those particular items.
Any other? So one other thing that I wanted to just note that we didn't talk about on Saturday, it actually came up as a topic of discussion with the DCC on last Thursday night, is we had proposed 25,000 to put towards marketing. So I've gotten quite the lesson in marketing and didn't realize just how broad and expensive quality marketing is. And so on our first go around, I'm trying to find firms that we could partner with right now is challenging because everyone I speak with is booked out into 23. But the thought behind this, and we've had this discussion before, is investing in actual marketing. And to do marketing well, you first start with research and digging in and finding out the problem. We talk about the problem all the time. We've talked about it with the DCC. There's a stereotype. Triton, right, is a conglomerate of 3 towns. And some towns used to send their kids to Salisbury or to Newburyport High School and different schools. And so it's been forever. This is Triton's been in existence for 50 years. And it's never been a smooth ride in any region to bring 3 towns together. So there's, the thinking was to really dig in and do a lot of research and talk to a lot of people and parents, and rather than just saying, yeah, I send my kid to the private school, but why? And really dig into what is perception, what is fact, what do we need to change, what do we need to just promote more. So the first proposal I had for the first phase of that was 50,000, and that was for about 3 to 4 months worth of pretty much full-time work, with doing a lot of digging, a lot of research, purchasing some market research, but also doing a lot of detailed work within the community, within the schools, parents, community members who don't have kids in school, and really learning to identify the problem, right? We talk about the problem, but we've never identified and really teased out the problem. And then as part of that would come up with 3 to 4 proposals on how that firm would suggest that we remedy the situation, right? There are certain things that we would change. There's certain things throughout that process that we would identify that we need to be better in. And then there'd be things that we just need to do a better job of communicating. So I just wanted to kind of get a sense of what type of appetite the committee has for spending that kind of money. We talked about the upfront cost is certainly big for that, all of that learning and the research and the developing the plan. There would need to be ongoing money within the budget then to support that ongoing effort. Obviously, the ongoing effort could be $500,000 a year. The ongoing effort could be $25,000, depending on what we decide as our approach moving forward. But the first step in that is to identify all of that, what needs to be done. So Kyle and I were talking about, talking with the finance subcommittee about additional capacity within the budget this year, and could those be one-time dollars that we spend this year to do that upfront work? And then the proposal that you have before you now includes 25,000, and that would be the ongoing maintenance budget. But we don't get to that until we spend the upfront money. So that 25,000 is still included on page 3, second from the top, with full day K for 25,000. So that's my question for you all is, I took, full disclosure, it still doesn't feel normal to spend that kind of money on marketing, but everyone I've spoken with, that's not a lot of money in that field, and you get what you pay for, right? And I think if we really want to learn and grow and rebrand and market and try and take put a serious dent in the kind of long-standing stigma, I think we have to invest in that. So would love your thoughts. Paul Mayette.
The first thought that comes to mind is that we are looking at a much larger capital outlay for potentially whatever the building project becomes. This would be valuable information going into that. I think that can guide that, if we're looking at not just fixing perception, but also, like you said, fixing whatever it is that we find is there, that could be something that would be very, very important to know before we undertake a project of that magnitude.
That's a good point. Thank you. Caitlin.
I mean, it's a lot of money, but I guess at the end of it, you would get that money back if people are choosing to stay within Triton or choosing to come to Triton. Further on Paul's point, when you can put in a new building, but if people still don't want to be in Triton, that is a huge waste of resources.
Yeah.
And that goes for any capital improvements throughout the district. If people aren't staying or aren't comfortable or are not moving to these towns and building houses in these towns and sending their kids into these town schools, nothing you do financially to add to it's going to make much of a difference. And I think it was you, or maybe at the DCC, a lot of these discussions happen on soccer fields and basketball courts.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard thing to nail down And that's what marketing would help you with, is to really nail down those discussions. But it's a lot of money. I just think investing the money now before you build a new anything, so that you can decide what has to go into that building, is a better choice than building and then doing it.
Hmm. Marissa.
So I have a question for you, Brian, which is, I've heard other people talk about keeping students who are going out to private schools. Is that the primary, your primary concern in putting this on the table?
Is that the primary concern? Students going to private schools alone?
Mm-hmm.
No. I mean, I think it has to do with two thoughts, right? No, it's not. Is that a piece of it? Yes, but students going off to private schools or returning doesn't impact our bottom line, right? For Chapter 70, we have a long way to go before, adding more numbers to the Chapter 70 formula for foundation enrollment would get us any more money. So no, I think it's about school choice. I think it's about attracting people to the area. I think it's about pride in the school district, in changing the perception. And there's been town officials sitting at DCC talking about the perception about at the soccer fields, and third, fourth grade, people starting to talk to one another saying, so where are you sending your kids to school? And an assumption, depending on the school, is you are or you're not sending your kid to Triton Middle School. So for me, it's about, no, let's have it be that the assumption is that is where we're sending our kids, and we feel good about it, right? So it's as much about the confidence when our students come in, when we're welcoming students as preschoolers at age 3 or 4, and being able to talk about, if you're at Pine Grove, the time you'll spend at Pine Grove, and then the time you'll spend at the middle school and high school over your 13, 14-year career as a Viking. So I think it's just as much about the community and pride in the schools and belief in the schools than it has to do certainly with private schools. I think, will we get some back? Absolutely. Are there a lot we'll never get back? Of course, right? If your family has all gone to Govs, or your family has all gone to the prep, of course your kids are going to the prep. I get that. Or it may not be the prep, it might be a small private Christian school, right? There are decisions that will be made, and I fully respect those. But I don't want it to be the detriment of the assumption about what exists at Triton, because there's so much good that goes on. And I think there are things, through this learning process too, we've done a lot of work to, our district strategy and making very strategic improvements and trying to be honest about that. But through this process, it's going to be a little bit of a humble pie, right? To be able to say, not only are these the things you need to celebrate, but here are the things you need to change. And we're willing to make those changes for sure.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I guess this is where I'm kind of getting stuck, is that I definitely see the need for a marketing plan, but I don't think you're going to affect private school students. And even if you do, that's not going to make a big difference. Choice has been relatively stable, and I'm not sure, you could affect kids not going out, and I'm not sure you want more applying. Right? We need strategic rather than volume. So, and to Paul's point, I can see, wanting to promote the district going into a building project, but I mean, I'm guessing they're going to put like a 5 to 10 year plan in front of you, and we're going to have a vote before you're getting well into a 5 and 10 year plan. I guess I'd be more, I don't know. I feel like I don't have enough information to say, yes, this is something we should go at right now, or no, it isn't, because I almost feel like if we can't affect anything immediately, then is there a point to waiting until things sort of settle a little? Because I'm not sure that people have the bandwidth for marketing to be effective right now. If we're talking about our average taxpayer or average town resident or somebody who's considering moving here, I'm not sure, I feel like their bandwidth is occupied at the moment because there's a lot going on. But I don't know that to be true. And I don't know what they would, what a proposal would look like, I guess, which would be part of my question. Is it more immediate or is it something that's farther down the road?
That's an interesting question because it's, the upfront work is very forward facing, right? We're asking a lot of families and staff and the community to give us feedback. And yeah, I mean, feedback is going to be different right now, right? That's just kind of a global statement there. Feedback is going to be tainted with the experience of the last 2 years. So that's certainly something to consider. And I think the decision at this point is, do we want to keep something in the general fund budget towards that? And then, anything that we would do with current year dollars as an upfront cost, we would bring to the finance subcommittee as a point of reference and kind of bat that around. We would have to get quotes anyway, right? If it's over 10,000, it has to be quotes. And if it's over 50, it has to be a sealed bid. So there's definitely some work to do before we just, launch right into this. So good questions. Susanna.
Oh, I had my hand up, but then I think Narissa kind of asked the question. Was really my concern, or what I wanted to know really was, to what extent have you had a good idea of the scope of what these firms are, and how long of a process is it going to be in terms of, like, this is sort of phase one, this will take X number of months, how they're going to do it, what they're going to do, but I think Narissa asked, but doesn't sound like you've got that level of detail yet.
So I have one firm that I've spoke with. There's a couple different that I have had a conversation, and then they are booking in 23. So it's been kind of referrals of referrals. But the one that was a $50,000 quote was a first 3 phases, which is do the research, identify the problem, and come up with solutions. And that was roughly, I think, that was probably early January, I got that proposal. And it was basically embedding themselves in the district through the end of March. So it's like a solid 3 months worth of work for the firm, with multiple people spending a lot of time, on a daily basis in and around the district. So that upfront work, I got to go find more quotes. Even, I've got to keep begging and borrowing to try and find people to get quotes from. It's more to tease out for sure, but in talking to 2, that upfront work is definitely 3, 4, 5 months.
Because I guess when they say coming up with solutions, I mean, that could be what term, media solutions, is it sort of active, that's, I'm not sure if, if they can give you a quote as to what you're looking at ongoing cost after that to maintain that. I mean, that sort of doesn't seem to cut. I think when you say 50,000, I think, yes, that's probably really reality of what market research is, and analytics that goes into that, etc. But then the solution part worries me, that you then are not budgeting appropriately for that going forward.
Yeah, no, and they flat out said, I can't answer the question of what that will cost until we identify the problem, and then we'll come up with the solutions. Certainly they'll come up with, the kind of the Cadillac and the
yeah,
I don't want to knock anyone's car, and not Cadillac version, right? So we would have options there. Similarly, when we talked about, could we do not the $50,000 solution, and they said, yeah, it's less information gathering, it's less research, so it's refining the issue to a lesser degree. And I feel like that's the most important thing, is right, doing the work to identify the problem and really articulate it well, even if we had to kind of more slowly roll out our solution to it. The missing piece is we've been talking about it for 50 years, but we've never gone through the effort of fully identifying the issue. So, Caitlin. She accidentally raised her hand.
Yes, I did. Thank you.
All
I
right.
am all set.
I've lowered your hand. So is there, I mean, clearly some questions, right? Long way from Kansas as far as being ready to say, here's the perfect solution. Are you okay with carrying at least in the tentative budget that $25,000 line? Or are you ready right now to say, we're not ready to invest in that this year? All right, I'm gonna put your hand back up. I put your hand down, Narissa, but then Paul Goldner saved you and decided to talk some too. Paul Goldner.
I mean, I guess I always like information. $25,000 for information in what's going to be a $47 million budget, to me is like, what are we going to do with it? That's when we sort of have to decide. But if we don't have information, we can't make a decision about whether we should do anything with it or not. We don't have any idea about whether it can impact our finances or, through students returning, whether we want that. We just have no idea if we don't start asking the questions. So at some point, we're going to have to start asking the questions. I don't know when the ideal time to do that is. So now.
And I think, so just to be clear, so the upfront cost of 50,000 is the first step before we get to any long-term solution. And we talked about using one-time funds, whether it's in the budget capacity or, Kyle and I have talked about school choice, right? Perfect use of those funds to say, these are students we've attracted and we're going to reinvest some of those dollars in long-term marketing. There's still that option, right? To look at this as a not general fund, that the work we would commit to do, whether it's in 6 weeks or 6 months, can be based out of available one-time funds through school choice or what have you, and make the decision then rather than including it in the general fund budget. And even a first year, right? Even a first year, because we've got 2.5 more years of ESSER funding that backfills and other one-time costs, even to be able to use some of those funds for a first year of implementation is a possibility as well, right? So we're not at the point of needing to bake in the 25,000 into the general fund to be able to continue. Because Paul Goldner, to your point, right? We don't even know we're continuing yet because we haven't been able to get the information.
So I'm still on the fence a little bit, but I think I'm coming down on the opposite. I'm asking the same questions that Paul Goldner is, which is, we need this information to kind of understand how to attack this. I can't get past really feeling like the timing is wrong on this right now. That even if we said you could have $1 million to throw at it, I would still say I'm not sure that we're going to get the right information just because of the timing right now. I just feel like people are, if you're asking a teacher who's already gone through so much to sit down and talk to, a marketing firm or asking students, I just feel like it's not a good time for it. And it's probably like one of those things. It's never a good time to have a kid or buy a house or change jobs, right? But I think I would be more open to potentially, spending one-time funds on this when we can kind of see things settling than right now. I'm just not, I don't think this is as productive as it could be, just because of the timing. But I mean, I have to say, like, if the rest of the committee says go, by all means, like, we got to throw everything we've got at it at that point, because you're going to get one shot at doing this. And I don't think there's going to be any do-overs, right?
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, and that's giving me pause, right? Thinking about the state of everyone. I've been thinking about all the work we would be doing, but the state of everyone we would be drawing on to get feedback. And I think that if we have one shot to really do this and ask and engage people well, we are not going to necessarily get our best bang for the buck right now. Absolutely. Susanna.
So contrary to that, I would, there is no good time, right? But if this is a well-established, firm market research, well prepped in, the subject matter experts, they know how to ask these questions. They know how to elicit the right, the information. And yes, it's going to be tainted with COVID, with pandemics, with school committees, etc. But I think that if there's an opportunity, I just do think information is very powerful to have, especially with what you guys are what we're looking into for the building projects, etc. But yeah, I just don't want us to hold back on something just because we're holding back because of the potential bias of COVID. There's always going to be that bias now to 5 years later, because when you get into into the depths of marketing, and we work a lot in patient satisfaction measures, and I hate to call them satisfaction measures. There's no such thing as experience. So I think that these folks will know how to elicit that information regardless of 1, 2 years, 3 years out.
So as I'm listening to you, I think I'm talking myself out of thinking that putting it in the budget right now makes sense, because what we're all talking about, my question coming in was, is there an appetite to spend this kind of money, 50,000 up front, to do this kind of market research and to develop these plans and really do it well? Which I'm hearing people say, yes, it's a lot of money, but yes, but we're talking about using one-time funds for that. And so the 25,000 that we carry in the budget is to implement those plans when we're done. And whether, like I said, we do this in 6 weeks or 6 months, is it a better approach then to figure out the one-time funds to complete the task? Again, whether that's in 6 weeks or 6 months, to go through that first phase, and then within a budget, if it's something where we have one-time funds available, to start that and know we have to budget it, but have a real, I know I would feel more comfortable proposing to you that we've gone through this process, you've all been part of the process, we've produced and reported all this research, and the budget going forward to implement Plan A as we've designed is $36,925 a year. I'd feel far better recommending a figure to you that's been developed out of that process, rather than putting a placeholder in a budget that we might not know, might not be enough or might be too much. I'm feeling now like, as we're talking through this, that actually makes sense to pull that out. Paul Goldner.
Just go down. Yes. A few weeks ago, Kylie talked about the conversations in the hallways about what do we want Triton to look like, that those conversations were coming back. And if we're able to fund the marketing research through one time and then come back and figure out what we need to spend to implement that, now might be the downside is we're coming out of COVID. The upside is we're coming out of COVID, and the conversations that are happening is, okay, we just went through this terrible thing. What do we want to get better at? What do we want to look like in the future? Those conversations our students are having now. So maybe we should be asking them now.
Absolutely. Erin.
So Brian, just based on the conversation that we've had so far tonight in this short period of time, I flip-flop back and forth a little bit on where I feel if it should be in the budget or if it shouldn't be in the budget. And right now, what I'm feeling is that it actually should stay, because if we do identify some small wins that are quick and able to be implemented right away, and we don't have anything set aside to be able to utilize towards that, then we would be missing out of it out on it until next season. So I'm almost thinking that you should try and keep it in for now. So that if we do end up with a result like that, that we would be able to at least start something with that cash or with that set aside account.
So the only thing I would say counter that is if we have other one-time funds, right? So we're basically making a decision now that would carry us through June of 23, right? So if we have one-time funds in the next 12, 15, 16 months, that would allow us to do both the market research and planning as well as take some first steps. Yeah, I guess I'm now struggling with putting a number in that I don't have a solid, right? We don't ever want to put something in where we don't really feel strongly as an absolute need. I know the research is needed, but if we're talking about that coming out of one-time funds, I'm now not feeling as confident saying we need to put that 25 in without a solid plan behind it. I guess is where I'm flip-flopping back and forth all the whole time like you are. I guess I would say it's good to hear. I think this has been helpful because I'm hearing there's an understanding and a belief that we need to do this, right? Invest money as much as it's a hard pill to swallow as far as the amount, but it's a need, right? 50 years is enough. Let's just really do it now on our 50th anniversary here. So I'm hearing there's a need and general support, but I think it makes more sense that we pull it out and bring it back and kind of come back up through the finance subcommittee on how we're planning as we identify within the general fund one-time funds that are available, or is it through school of choice or whatever it is, kind of come back formally through the finance subcommittee and make an actual proposal and say, here's what we would like to do. We've got some information from firms other than the one that is the only one that I've been able to get an actual proposal from. Does that seem like an okay approach?
Yeah, I think that's probably the fairest way to do it, because I think we're all flip-flopping back and forth.
Yeah.
And who knows when we'll be out of COVID. I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to wait, but I don't want to, right? I think our towns believe us when we say we're proposing things that are need. And I'm not sure I can stand behind a need for 25,000 right now for next year's budget. And that's my struggle.
Yeah. So I think going back to the finance subcommittee would be the most feasible thing to do.
Okay. So we talked about both positions. We talked about that. I think I had asked and there wasn't any other questions. Maybe it makes sense to have Kyle go over the fourth piece of paper since I've been talking the whole time. Kyle, you want to talk?
Sure thing.
All right.
Yeah.
So the one that says for discussion purposes only at the top. Oh, wait a minute, Paul Goldner. Paul the second.
Right.
The statement.
I did have one more question on that.
Oh, okay.
On that page that we jumped from the two positions to the marketing real fast.
Oh, sorry.
I think I heard you say it, but I just want to make sure those projectors for the middle school, high school, you're looking at still doing that just out of other funds.
Correct.
Okay.
Current year funds, yes. There it is. Kyle, take it away.
Excellent. So this last sheet, the one titled Potential Assessment, February 2nd, this is the same format as what was presented on Saturday. Pared it down to just one scenario to align with the proposed spending that Brian just went over. Starting at the top again, real quick, that first chart highlights the shift in enrollments and the corresponding shifts in assessments to show where we're starting. So without adding another dollar to the budget, Salisbury's assessment would go down by 121,000. Newbury's would go up by 71,000. I can certainly answer questions if anybody would want more detail on that. But then the second chart there, so highlights the scenario of an operating expense increase of 1,506,000. I'm going to try that again. 1,576,416, which is a 3.45% increase over the current year, FY22. And after taking into consideration what we're estimating to be a $121,000 increase in other revenues, the result would be a $1.4 million, $1.5 million increase in assessments to our communities. And again, the disconnect there between the 1.5 and the 1.4 is those $121 of other general, 121,000 of other general revenues that we're assuming. Any questions on that, but wanted to show certainly the impact of where the budget proposal would yield on the communities.
I was gonna say, so in essence, if we just took 25,000 off of that, right? Think about 10,000 off of Salisbury, and about whatever the balance is off of our.
And yeah,
So does that make sense? So that's, we kind of looked at a bunch of hypotheticals before, but tied to that sheet, that's what the assessments would be.
Can I just ask one question, and maybe I'm missing it here, but you show an increase at the top of 3.45%. Down in that bottom right corner, it's 4.07. What's the difference between those two numbers that I'm not seeing?
it's a great question. So two different elements. So the difference between the 1.576 and the 1.455, that's the 121,000 of increased other revenues we're assuming. So state aid is right now showing a $66,000 increase over the current year. And then our regional transportation reimbursement, we're expecting to increase by 55,000. So the sum of those two is the 121. But then also the disconnect between the 3.45% and the 4.07% is just because we're dealing with different totals. So the 1.5, when we take that as a percentage of about 47 million, that's the 3.45%. Whereas if we look at 1.4 million as a percentage of the base 37.3 million, that's why it's a greater percentage of the total.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for highlighting that.
Paul Goldner.
So just to be clear, the 3.45 is our operating budget. The 4.07 is what the towns are picking up on top of what they're paying, highlighting that the town's portion of the budget is going up much faster than the state's portion of the budget.
Also important to note, yeah, absolutely. There's not a proportionate, the state is not taking on its proportionate share of that increase.
So every year, if everything increased commensurately, we got a set amount of state aid that was always a percentage and a chunk. But this year we got a 0.73, 0.75% increase in our state aid, $66,000 on a $46 million budget. So the town's assessments always, and from a percentage, right, from a comparison standpoint, always increase faster and a higher percentage than our actual operating. So $1 million question. Tonight's the last opportunity to give us guidance. So Kyle comes back to us next week, regular business meeting, and we'll provide to you without a whole lot of prompt circumstance, because it's just a summary document that just synthesizes everything we've been talking about for weeks now. But we'll provide for you a tentative budget that needs to be voted next week. We'll then post that in the paper and everything and have the public hearing on the tentative budget the following week, because the February break is actually late this year. So we need to hear from y'all. Is this the number, the 1576 minus 25,000? Is that the number we're putting forward in the tentative budget? Marissa.
Brian, can you quickly, before everyone weighs in, kind of talk through, because I know we have people who have been through an unusual budget year or not been through a budget year at all, about kind of high watermark budgets and.
Sure, yeah.
The
So every
process.
year, yeah, the regional agreement does not use the word high water mark in any, nowhere in the document, but we have always told the towns that this will be, the February budget will be the worst case scenario. The high water mark so that when they're planning for the town budgets, which is obviously we're late for them, that this is their worst case scenario that they would build into their budgets. Generally, things have further refined. We're still working with the things that have the biggest movement for us will be healthcare. We're meeting with the PEC next Thursday. And I will tell you, our consultant isn't happy. I think I told you that we get a 0% our renewal. He's not good with that. So I think it will get even lower. So there's potentially more savings there. There are other things. I think we're pretty solid now in the majority of other things that could tweak. But things can change over the next 4 weeks. So we then come back and we have to vote a finalized budget by March 15th. So this year, that's actually the March 9th meeting where we'll finalize that budget. So we set the high water mark here to be further trimmed if it needs to be between now and the final vote. So give us some information guidance tonight, present to you a tentative budget based on what we talked about tonight for you to approve next week. Public hearing happens on the 16th, 1 week after, so it's 2 weeks from tonight. February break happens. We come back that following week, the week after February break is March 2nd, frightening. Have one more discussion, have a chance to consider what you heard from the public hearing, anything else you've heard, thoughts, have one follow-up discussion, and then you vote a final budget on Wednesday, March 9th. So that is the very fast pace, it seems like this year, between now and you taking a final vote on March 9th. So again, this is not the final budget, and the towns are used to knowing that this is oftentimes higher than the final budget, sometimes not always. Sometimes it stays the same, sometimes it decreases, but we don't ever increase it from this point.
Does anybody have any thoughts? Narissa?
Can I say one other thing? So we have one other thing that we might get more information on as we go forward is regional transportation. Chapter 70 doesn't ever change, but who knows? We could get movement. Right now, we're assuming 80%. Hopefully, we'll get a little bit of movement on that and actually get additional revenue, which obviously comes straight off of the town's assessments and its calculation.
And circuit breaker too, right, Brian?
We assumed 75% for circuit breaker.
Yeah.
Right? Pretty sure.
Yeah, well, so this year is unique with circuit breaker as well, because we're in the position now where we have a known number because we were able to carry over 1 year's worth of revenue. So we don't have to wait for the state to get us that information. We can budget a consistent number.
So are we counting on the full second year of transportation phase in?
That's correct, yeah. Oh, okay. My apologies. I was thinking about circuit breaker tuition reimbursement, but for the transportation reimbursement, yes, we are assuming that the second year phase in will occur. That's this year we received about $100,000 worth of revenue as the first year first year of implementation. Next year is set to double, so it's about 200,000. That's what we assumed.
Okay. So I guess my commentary, I think, based on the refining that we did Saturday and tonight, that the way it stands right now with the adjustments that we discussed, this is the way it should go forward with a tentative budget. I think it puts in full day kindergarten, which is something that we know that we need to finish up in the third year of that. It puts in some common sense phase-ins for things like Chromebooks to make sure that we're not hitting a fiscal cliff somewhere down the road. I think all those things are prudent things to do. We have strongly heard, I believe, from families and, from teachers, staff members, that mental health needs to be a priority. And I see that being kind of the centerpiece of the additions in this budget, is making sure that mental health supports are front and center there, and that some shoring up some of the academic supports are there as well. And also, again, I think it's been a long-standing issue, I'll say a gap, maybe is a better word, not having supports for students who are looking at careers and for things like internships at the high school level, and that is something that is very much needed. So I'm very happy to see that go in here as well. So I think, you know, all in all, we're either shoring up the things that we know are needed in reaction to what we're seeing in schools, and we're plugging known gaps, in some cases that were in part even caused by past cuts, because I can see to some degree the science, technology, and engineering piece, we lost technology. You know, what was it, 5 years ago? That whole piece just sort of fell out of the elementary schools. And, you know, this is an adjustment of what was there, but it's an effort to do some restorations in a creative way and start to try and plug that gap. So, you know, I think I'll be interested to see what we hear from the public hearing. I will be interested to see what we hear from the DCC on the, whatever that is, I think it's like 2 weeks, that we talk to the towns, because obviously that has an effect. But given that we didn't receive a lot of feedback from them at the last DCC meeting, I think this is a good starting place. There's nothing that I would cut here, and nothing that I have heard the need to add here that I would want to change moving into, you know, voting and tentative budget.
I think that was well said, Narissa. I think the administration, the principals, I think everybody did a great job in making sure that they put forth exactly what they felt they needed in their schools. We've been hearing about mental health long before COVID started. So I think this is a much needed add to our schools, that they absolutely need this for our students and our staff too, because I'm sure our staff could probably talk to a social worker every once in a while as well. I think we've looked at everything from kindergarten all the way up to our graduating students to make sure that we've tried to put in everything that would help benefit all of our students. I think this is the high watermark, and at the DCC, everybody understood what the needs of our students were. Everybody understood the social and emotional stress that's been put on everybody. Our towns are probably in the same situation that we are, that everybody's just trying to make sure that everybody's okay. I wouldn't change taking anything out. I think it's a great thing that we're actually adding in this STEM teacher to make sure that our youngest students are giving them some encouragement and some food for thought with engineering and science. I want to thank Kyle and Brian and all of you for the great work that you've done and all the time and effort that you put in, even the school committee. This is a long process. It's a sometimes emotional process, because you want to make sure that everybody has what they need with the small amount of money that the state gives to us. So we'll continue to work with the towns in our public hearing to see what other suggestions or ideas other people may have. Brian, do you have anything else?
I do not. I think if that's, it's, I mean, certainly, if you're saying and other people are saying, yes, what she said to what Narissa said, then that certainly is very clear guidance for us, for sure.
Okay, can I have a motion? Next week, we have in person on February 9th. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
We need a roll call vote. Erin,
Yes.
Susanna,
Yes.
Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Paul Mayette,
Yes.
Narissa,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Thank you all. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Hey, Narissa and Brian, can you stay on?
Mhm.
Sure.
Can I stay on too? I have a question for you guys.